Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, one of the most controversial mysteries in ancient history. We're talking about a lost civilization, giant stone heads, and a debate that could seriously shake up everything you thought you knew about the ancient world.
And it all starts with this one simple question. Do these ancient statues from Mexico look African? I mean, just look at them. This question has kicked off an absolutely fierce debate. It's not just about archaeology, it's about identity, it's about history. On one side, you have people who see these sculptures and say, that's it. That's undeniable proof of ancient African contact with the Americas. But on the other side, people say, hold on, you're just projecting your own ideas onto a totally separate ancient indigenous culture.
And believe me, it doesn't stop with the statues. The mystery gets way, way deeper. Back in 1992, a German scientist named Svetlana Bolobanova made a discovery that was so shocking, the entire archaeological establishment basically called it impossible. She found traces of cocaine and nicotine in ancient Egyptian mummies. Now here's the problem. Those substances come from plants that only grew in the Americas. So how in the world did they end up in 3,000-year-old mummies, thousands of years before Columbus ever set sail? So you've got the heads, you've got the mummies, and then there's the DNA. Scientists have found certain genetic markers that are super common in Africa showing up in some indigenous Mexican populations. And the rates they're seeing are, well, they're kind of hard to explain. You put all these pieces together, and it really starts to challenge the official timeline of history. It hints that maybe, just maybe, these ancient cultures were way more connected than we've ever been led to believe.
So, to really get a handle on this whole controversy, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to meet the civilization at the very heart of it all, the Olmec. Honestly, they're the key to unlocking this entire mystery.
First thing you should know, the name Olmec isn't even what they called themselves. That name actually came from the Aztecs way later. It means rubber people, probably because of all the rubber trees in the area where they lived. What they actually called themselves, we have absolutely no idea. It's just one of the many mysteries surrounding them. So these guys, the Olmec, they were around for a long time. They flourished for over 800 years, mostly in the Gulf Coast region of Mexico, what we now call Veracruz and Tabasco. And they weren't just living in small villages. They built these incredible urban centers, cities like San Lorenzo. And later, their capital, Aventla, was a huge bustling city. We're talking about a population of around 18,000 people. That's a big deal for that time.
And you have to understand this was long before the Maya or the Aztecs came onto the scene. The Olmec were the real pioneers. They were the ones who built the first major pyramids in Mesoamerica. They developed one of the first complex writing systems. Oh, and get this, they were the first people to domesticate cacao and make chocolate. They even created that ritual ball game you see in movies, the one that became so important to all the later cultures. This is exactly why scholars call them the mother culture. They basically laid the groundwork for everyone who came after.
Okay, so if the Olmec were this incredible foundational civilization, why is their origin story at the center of such a massive firestorm, right? It's a good question. Let's dive into the actual clues and see what all the fuss is about. All right, first up, the most famous pieces of evidence, these 17 colossal stone heads. Now, supporters of an African connection look at them and say, case closed. Look at the broad noses, the full lips. That's clear proof. But mainstream Mesoamerican scholars push back. They argue that, hold on, those features aren't exclusively African. In fact, they say you can see those same features on the indigenous people living in that exact same region of Veracruz today. And can we just take a second to talk about the scale of this? We're talking about heads that weigh up to 50 tons. That's heavier than a semi-truck. They were carved from single massive blocks of basalt rock and then, get this, transported over 60 miles through jungle and over mountains, all without wheels, without animals to pull them. I mean, that's just a mind-blowing feat of engineering no matter who did it. Okay, so beyond the heads, there's the writing. The Olmec script still hasn't been deciphered, which is a mystery in itself, but some researchers have pointed out that some of the symbols look a lot like ancient Libyan scripts from West Africa. Now, of course, skeptics are quick to jump in and say, whoa, that's just a coincidence. They argue that human cultures all over the world often come up with similar-looking symbols completely independently. Then we get to the genetic markers, and this is where it gets really technical and really debated. There's a specific African genetic lineage called haplogroup A that shows up in some indigenous Mexican groups. And for some, that's a smoking gun. But mainstream science has a few counterarguments. They say it could be modern contamination, or maybe it's just a statistical fluke, or, and this is a big one, maybe that same marker came over from Asia thousands and thousands of years ago with the first people who crossed the Bering Strait.
But maybe the weirdest, most difficult clue to explain away comes from halfway across the world in Egypt. Remember those mummies? The discovery of cocaine and nicotine in them is a real problem for the standard historical narrative. You know, cocaine from the coca plant, nicotine from tobacco. These are American plants. The initial reaction was, oh, it must be contamination. But then other labs, multiple labs, have replicated the findings. So, how did it get there?
This brings up a huge question. Could they have even made the journey? Well, while mainstream science says there's no proof ancient people did cross the Atlantic, a famous explorer named Thor Heyerdahl proved it was absolutely possible. Back in 1970, he built a reed boat using only ancient-style materials and techniques, and he sailed it all the way from Morocco to Barbados. He proved that, technologically speaking, the trip was totally doable.
So you see, this is where it gets really complicated, because this isn't just some dusty academic debate about pottery shards and DNA. It's so much more than that. It's a deeply emotional conflict, and it's rooted in very real historical injustice and big questions about identity. From the perspective of many indigenous scholars, this is a story they've heard before. For centuries, they argue, outsiders have looked at the incredible achievements of their ancestors and tried to give the credit to literally anyone else, aliens, Egyptians, you name it. So for them, hearing someone suggest the Olmec were actually African feels like just another slap in the face. It's another form of erasure, another way of saying, your ancestors couldn't have built this amazing civilization on their own. But then you have the other side of the coin. Many Afrocentric scholars look at this and say, hold on a second. They point out that Western academia has a long, well-documented history of downplaying, ignoring, or completely erasing African achievements. So when they see the evidence for pre-colonial voyages being dismissed as fringe, they see it as just another example of that same old Eurocentric gatekeeping, a way to protect a version of history that keeps Europe at the center.
And that's really the heart of the problem, isn't it? Both sides are coming from a place of real, legitimate historical pain. And because of that, trying to have a calm, objective conversation just about the evidence, without all the emotion and the politics getting in the way, becomes incredibly, incredibly difficult. Maybe even impossible.
So, where does that leave us with this whole mystery? Well, it kind of leaves us with a lot of smoke, but no definitive fire. The evidence is definitely provocative, it makes you think, but it's not conclusive. Let's break it down. Here's what we know for sure. The Olmec were a brilliant, foundational civilization in the Americas. We know their accomplishments were absolutely immense. What we don't know is whether they did it all alone. The evidence for transatlantic contact is still circumstantial, but we also don't have a really good explanation for things like cocaine in Egyptian mummies. And who knows what other secrets are still out there, just waiting to be found.
And I think ultimately, this whole controversy over the Olmecs shows us something really important. It shows us that history isn't just a collection of facts about the past. It's about who we are right now. It's about identity, it's about heritage, and really, it's about power. Power in the present and who gets to control the narrative of where we all come from.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most important takeaway. When certain questions become too dangerous to even ask, not because we have the answers, but because asking is just too politically messy, that's when you know we've drifted away from science and into ideology. And it really leaves you wondering, what else aren't we being told?